Good morning, everyone. Halla, I think you're there.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. And we'll be joined shortly by our Dean, Dr. Sanjeev Kagram. But I wanted to thank you for joining us. So from one fellow Thunderbird to another, welcome. Oh, do you have your audio unmuted?
I did. Hello, everyone. It's great to see you, Kelly. And I love seeing all the T-birds popping up here in the chat.
Well, it's good to see the T-bird family represent. So, while we're waiting for the Dean to join us, I'd love to just kind of start the conversation and actually ask you to share a little bit with the group here about what you're doing with the B team now, and this is an exciting new role and position and such a wonderful organization. Maybe you could share a little bit about you and the organization.
Of course, happy to. I assume you're letting people into the room, right, Kelly?
Yeah.
Or someone else?
People, don't worry about that. I'll take care of letting folks in.
We are all learning how to live in this technology world, and no one more than Dean Sanjeev Kagram. So we hope to see him soon. But yes, so I'm Halla. I'm a T-bird from '95, and I am from Iceland. Normally live in New York City, but I am enjoying a little bit of a better situation in my home country, Iceland, right now. So coming to speak to you from Iceland. I am the CEO of the B Team, which is a 7-year-old NGO that was founded by global business leaders and civil society leaders who believed it was time to confront business as usual. And so they came about really in the time leading up to the Paris Agreement, and were extremely influential in helping that to happen. Our chair is Paul Polman, who most of you probably know as the CEO of Unilever, who led with a very bold sustainable living plan over his 10-year tenure there. Our vice chair is Sharon Burrow, who leads the global labor movement, and a fearless Australian woman. And we work with the likes of Mark Benioff of Salesforce, and Mary Robinson, former president of Ireland, Christiana Figueres, who led the Paris Agreement, Jesper Broden, who leads the IKEA group, and Emmanuel Faber, the CEO of Danone, who most recently has become a B corporation in the US and has set a bold goal to be a certified B corporation in the world in just 5 years' time. So my role is very much to tackle in holistic fashion the ambition that we need to deal with the convergence of crisis that we are facing in this moment in the world, from COVID to climate to inequality to trust and breakdowns in our democracies.
It's a heavy slate, but it sounds like you have an amazing team that you've assembled there. And I would imagine that when you started, the pandemic wasn't in existence. So I imagine that you've had to pivot pretty dramatically with your work in terms of our kind of new reality. How has your work's changed from before the pandemic and now what we're experiencing?
Yeah, I think that should be at the heart of our conversation, and I'm sure that's what Sanjeev would really raise. But COVID is, of course, something that has impacted all of us and will continue to impact all of us for a good while yet. But in my opinion, it is something that has exposed other challenges we already were facing and accelerated maybe how dangerous they have become. So in my opinion, it's incredibly challenging and has its own immediate and urgent challenges for us to attend to, which B Team has certainly been trying to do. But at the end of the day, it is there because of climate change. We are likely to see more pandemics because of climate change. We were already in a crisis of inequality. COVID has hit in very unjust and unequal ways, so we have accelerated that challenge in the world. And last but not least, I think we've seen better now than ever how important global collaboration is, but also how, I'm sorry to say, broken it feels and ill-equipped to handle these big global challenges in a way that we really need right now.
It seems like the pandemic is certainly a wake-up call to all of us. And as terrible as it is that you wonder whether that it might be the nudge that people need to take some of this seriously.
I think it is, and I think I see our friend.
I think so too. Here he is.
Hello.
Welcome. So we just were having a wonderful conversation. We talked a little bit about the B team, and certainly a little bit about how COVID has impacted her work, and really how COVID has highlighted the importance of really taking climate change seriously. So we've warmed up the crowd for you. We've got a lot of T-birds in here, but I'm going to let you both continue with the conversation.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you so much. How wonderful to see you virtually. Of course, we all wish we were together in person, but we will get there, I know, as a community and as a world. So maybe we could just go back. We met 2.5 years as I was entering and taking over Thunderbird. You were moving into the B team, and we had this fabulous set of conversations. And I think, as I recall, because it had such a big impact on me, the themes were ambition and being bold and transformative. And maybe you had this wonderful circle diagram, which I don't know if you already spoke about in the sort of the prep with Kelly here, but could you share with our audience the elements of that strategic circle that you had that was so powerful, that really, frankly, impacted me personally, but also shaped our strategy at Thunderbird as we thought about how could we contribute to the SDGs?
Oh, thank you, Sanjeev. That is so nice to hear, and it's so good to see you. I wish we were having one of our wonderful lunches or coffees in person, but soon, I hope. Well, I mean, Kelly and I I gave a brief background of what the B team is, but let me go straight to what you're referring to, and we call that the B team compass. And it really is the leadership vision that the B team leaders co-created around the big boardroom table with Mark Benioff at the top floor of Salesforce Halla 2 years ago. So we sat down. They had already been working together for 5 years to try to be the most progressive, bold, and brave leaders in the world. But I would say most of the B team leaders were at that time thinking about how do we rise to the leadership that this world needs in our own companies. So they were trying to lead by brave action. And I think one of the most important insights we've had over the last 2 years, in addition to the coming up with the leadership compass that guides everything we do now, is really that it's not enough for leaders today to call themselves leaders if you're only leading by brave action in your company. That should almost be a given. You need to go beyond that today, and you need to be leading your sector, your geography, multi-stakeholder collaborations, because our challenges are so complex and they're so interrelated that it is not going to be the private sector without government, without civil society, or one company that does good and the rest doesn't do anything. So that's sort of a really important thing to highlight here as we gather on the 75th anniversary of the UN General Assembly. We have to move faster, further, and we have to do it together. But let me go to the B team leadership compass. So basically, we agreed that there is a certain definition for leadership that is needed now. And it starts with purpose. And all of us have heard a lot about purpose, but it's a fact that companies that have a compelling social purpose, they do better at attracting and retaining talent, at really uplifting a culture of engagement, at really delivering outsized performance, not just for the financial bottom line, but holistically. But one of the things we thought when we were talking about purpose was it's not enough to have a compelling social purpose if you don't exercise principled leadership. So to us, the essence of a moral compass is the combination of purpose. Our purpose is to be in service of humanity. Different companies, different organizations, different leaders may have a different purpose, but we define it very broadly. We see it to be in service of humanity. But then we have 3 principles, and we think they're all equally important, and we cannot uplift one without understanding its impacts and interdependence on the other. First one, sustainability. We cannot do business beyond planetary boundaries. It's very clear. Second one, equality. We cannot tackle these challenges without unleashing the full potential of all of our people and addressing the many injustices that, for example, climate change causes for populations that are not at the table in coming up with the solutions. And the third one is really accountability, because we can be bold and brave, but unless we hold our feet to the fire and start putting transparent disclosures on how we're doing against non-financial issues, we will not earn our license to operate.
That's fantastic. And so I know you began to speak to Kelly about this, but let's go dig deep. Progress do you at the B team along many partners, because like you said, it takes a village, it takes partnership, it takes us all to really advance and make the kind of transformational change we need to achieve in the world. What progress were you making, let's say, prior to the pandemic? I remember we were sitting again or seeing each other. Oh, did we lose you, Halla? Your video, at least, in Davos. And, you know, at the time, the pandemic was just, had already emerged in some sense, hadn't gone global. But let's take that point in time. We had such a wonderful, again, touch point there. Where were you proud of the progress you had made with the B team? And more generally, do you think we were making progress before really the pandemic transformed our lives?
Yeah, I would say the proudest moment I felt on behalf of the B team and the incredible work they did way before I joined them, but part of it after I joined them, was the fact that in 2015, the year that we came up with the global goals or the sustainable developmental goals, and we reached the Paris Agreement, with support with over 190 countries around the world, the B team went to Davos, which tends to be, I'm sorry to say, where the crisis of conformity sits. And the B team really believes that part of its role to confront business as usual is to bring sort of what needs to be said into rooms where we're comfortable not necessarily saying that or hearing it. So in 2015, B team showed up in Davos and said, we need to get to a net zero world by 2050. This was considered unimaginable at the time and frankly not considered mainstream agenda. But relentless work in lots of forums by lots of leaders around the world, in 5 years norms shifted. And in 2020, when I came to Davos only for the second time or third time maybe myself, climate was everywhere on the main agenda. So in 5 years, we managed to shift norms along with lots of partners and with radical collaboration in significant and meaningful ways. And I hope that we will do the same, this virtual Davos that comes up in 2021, and really manage to show up and say, we have all of these crises. We're really in a moment where our crises are converging, and it's not easy to be a leader today. And we're asking a lot of our leaders. But this time, we need to be honest to ourselves, because I don't believe we were in 2008 when we had the global financial crisis. And we restarted mostly the very things that fell upon us and didn't learn enough and didn't transform enough. This time we need to show up now and in Davos and say it's time for a reset. Our economic system is broken. We need to get at the root causes of what we measure. And now in September, 50 years after the infamous essay from Milton Friedman, where he said the only purpose of business was to serve its shareholders, the Friedman doctrine has left us with a burning planet, a broken social contract. It did drive economic growth and helped create value, but it failed in sharing that value and that prosperity in more just and fair ways, and hence the broken social contract. And it failed in accounting for the fact that the planet is incredible and it's our only home, but it does not sustain the level that we have been working at. And it failed to acknowledge that without really engaging all stakeholders, you are not going to create value for shareholders. So I would say that the new rallying cry needs to be a reset. We need to accelerate the transition from that shareholder primacy era that served us but is no longer serving us, and towards what I would call stakeholder governance or stakeholder capitalism. And that needs to be something that we come together about from this moment and on. And I think COVID has accelerated people's openness for that. And frankly, it's broken us. We are broken. And when we are cracked, when we're broken, we're also cracked open. And I think as human beings, no matter where we sit, we realize that we cannot go back. There is only bouncing forward from these difficult times. And that bouncing forward has to include a better economic system.
So the pandemic, Halla, and you're at the B team, you're talking to all these incredible leaders that are part of your board and also partners around the world. What have you been hearing? And in some sense, take us through 6 months or so between March and now, September. What's been the evolution of what you're, the conversations you're having with the C-suite and CEOs and other stakeholders? How has that evolved in this last 6 months?
It's evolved tremendously. And if I try to put it in a few buckets, I think in the beginning, it was all about how do we respond to this incredibly challenging moment. And the B team leaders and most of the leaders we engaged with beyond the B team itself really did try to respond to the moment with compassion. And that ranged from putting money and resources into coordinating and developing vaccines and real solutions to this great global challenge, to helping deliver PPE, creating ventilators that could operate on batteries so that people in Africa, 40% of which do not have access to electricity in their or healthcare of the quality that is needed, to doing right by employees. So it ranged in all kinds of responses, but I was proud to see some of our B team companies actually trying to address pay inequality during the pandemic, to actually reduce pay from the higher paid and increase pay from the lower paid. I was proud to see B team leaders step up and say, do not lay people off, give a few months without doing that, so we help with the economic consequences of this. And overall, I would put that under the umbrella of uplifting the S in the ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues. I think B team was very strong on E and had taken very bold stance on lots of social issues, but this really people first became sort of the center of the response period. And then I would say the second phase has been, and we got there kind of early because we're always trying to think further ahead into the future, and that's how do we recover from this period? What do we do with the trillions of dollars that we are printing in every country around the world? Do we invest it across the board in any business, or do we invest it in the kind of businesses and jobs that we need? Do we invest in a green, just, and inclusive future? And we spend a lot of time advocating for how governments and the global agenda should be shaped by a just, green, and inclusive recovery. And I would say Europe responded the most with the most bold and brave response so far. I'm disappointed in some of how little this agenda has been shaped in the US and many other places. So we still have a lot to do there, and we will continue that. But I would say now we're sort of pretty quickly, we moved into the third phase, which is like, how do we actually see this terrible time as an opening to be the leaders that the world needs us to be? And what does that mean? Does that mean that each one of us can just change in our own lives, in our own companies, which all of us had to do very fast when this hit? It transformed our work lives and our lives very fast, and we showed how fast we can transform when we're forced to. But are we able to take a step up or step back? I would like to say step up and take a bigger look at the world we live in, the systems we live in, and see this as a moment to transform our systems so that they are in service and support and incentivize the kind of behaviors we need from business. And that's anywhere from, will we find the courage to give up quarterly reporting, or at least add to it long-term reporting that is fully inclusive of the new definition of success, which needs to include all stakeholders or environment, social, and governance metrics? Will we see this as an opportunity to say goodbye to some things that don't serve us anymore? That could include offices for some, or partially. That could include inflexible ways of working and the opportunity for people to live where they want. It could include opportunity to change the face of leadership. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but we're still male, pale, and stale in every boardroom, every CEO suite, nearly every country leadership, and yet the evidence is overwhelming that gender balance and diversity pays off to the bottom line and to innovation and to everything else. Will we use this moment, unlike any other in our lifetime, to build back better? That's been the biggest emphasis for us for a long time now.
No, it's great, Halla. I want to just say and share with our audience, and I know you know about this, with another wonderful Thunderbird alum, Sohang Gurwal, and MUFG Bank, which you know and many of our colleagues know is the 5th largest financial institution bank in the world. We have been advancing a lot of work on compassion in the global finance sector. So I wanted to highlight that because you started off with compassion as being a central attribute of all leadership, but certainly in the context of a global pandemic. And so we're putting together a guidebook with our colleagues at MUFG Bank and a series of other wonderful partners. And it's, again, I think a sign of what you're suggesting, Halla, is that what seemed to not go together has to go together. Compassion and the global finance sector were two things you wouldn't put together. But again, thanks to bold leadership by Sohang, our wonderful alum, and many other leaders at MUFG Bank, along with others across the global finance sector industry and many partners, we are advancing a bold new initiative on compassion, which very much then links to the hard-headed and hard, on the front ESG outcomes that we have to achieve. So let me then just take us to one more thing, because you made a big emphasis of the S in ESG. Of course, then, in the midst of all this, we've had massive social protests around the world. Institutionalized isms, and particularly racism here in the United States, having to do with police brutality and police injustice and a flawed criminal justice system, but really all over the world. These, if I can say, sort of pre-existing deep and ingrained inequalities and injustices have come to the fore. So say a little bit more about how the B team and the leaders that you work with and the sector and the industries more broadly have really said, this now can no longer be the case. We can no longer have societies with these forms of institutionalized isms of all types.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Sanjeev. I just think this time calls for us to dismantle a lot of structural inequalities and injustices. And I think I lived through the Black Lives Matter movement in New York City this spring, and it was incredibly powerful. And I just, to any of you who are business leaders today, I think we're at a very interesting moment for leadership. And then I want to get specifically to race. We're at a moment where new power has incredible influence. And if you're in a position of traditional power and you think you can ignore these movements, whether it's Me Too, Black Lives Matter, or the movements for financial inequality, I actually think they're all quite interrelated. You are probably not going to make it through what I sometimes call a portal moment. I think we're at a portal moment, not just a pivotal moment. So we're in an old world where people say, okay, Milton Friedman is still right. The only purpose I have is to serve the shareholders, and that's what I do. And you will be left in the old world. Or you are awakened by what's happened. You have unleashed your compassion, your humanity. You've opened your heart. You've been cracked open because of what's happened, and you are working on being a better person, better listener, better learner. And you will understand that only by having the voices of all of these stakeholders around the table in solving our challenges will we be successful at it. There is no climate justice or climate, there's no addressing our climate crisis without addressing racial justice or gender justice. There is no addressing this moment without talking about financial inequality and how that has broken our social contract. So I think one of the things that I've definitely been pushing for, and we've done on the B team, is we need to listen and learn. We brought Van Jones in at the height of the development with Black Lives Matter, and he opened up to us in a way that was incredibly empowering. And he's been an unbelievable individual in reaching across the aisle between, whatever political beliefs you have. There is something called criminal justice. There's something called justice for Black lives. And I think that was very helpful for many of our leaders. We've also made a concerted effort to change the makeup of our leadership to be more gender balanced and more diverse. I've done that in every other boardroom I sit around, putting it on the agenda, because unless we change who's around the table, we're not going to understand this. And I will be the first, and I will continue to say, I don't think I understood. Even having lived in the US for a long time, lived in Alabama, seen incredible injustices happen in front of my eyes, I don't think I understood on my own skin until so many voices raised it, what it's like to be a mother that doesn't feel you can see your child leave the door and think they will be safely treated. And I don't think there's just so much here that we need to unpack. So dismantling these structures that have not created equitable opportunities, have not brought investment in the hands of those who can help us innovate and create solutions and value during a time where we need it, will leave you in the old world. And I'm very encouraged to say that nearly every business leader and board director I speak to now understands this, but most of them have pretty profound questions, and it usually starts with, tell me how. So they see the problem, but not all feel. So some of the work we're doing in a coalition called Imperative 21, where we're trying to bring together artists and activists and civil society and business leaders and in a broad movement to change our economic system, is how do we equip our leaders? How do we help our leaders on-ramp onto delivering the SDGs, delivering ESG performance? How do we shift norms in our culture? Because at the end of the day, Sanjeev, we need to change ourselves too. And not a single person that can be on the sidelines of this change. It's massive. And last but not least, I'm going to say something few business leaders perhaps say, how do we get the right policies in place to make sure we get this done in time?
Yeah, and in that, let me just ask, and we have a wonderful comment from Jessica, and I'm going to come to a comment from Amanda Ellis, our great partner at ASU and a professor of practice at Thunderbird. But Jessica says, business and consumers can be partners, leaders in creating the change we wish to see in the world. Our roadmap, ? The SDGs. So when you think about the work ahead, what is the role of governments? First, and then let's talk about civil society, and then I do want to come to academic institutions. I do want to say, Halla, as you know, and I want to share with our Thunderbird alums and our partners around the world, we too have really thought deeply about what we can do more and accelerated and amplified our work. So we have a new task force reporting to me. It's called Global JEDIs, Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Sustainability. It involves students, faculty, staff, alumni, partners all around the world. It is making immediate recommendations. We've already accelerated at a number of different fronts. We have a wonderful partnership with International Bridges to Justice, which is a fantastic organization strengthening public defense systems around the world and particularly empowering public defenders. Our gaze goes rightfully to the police and policing, but behind that is an entire justice system that is wobbly and under-resourced at best, here in the United States even, the wealthiest country on the planet, but all over the world, as well as making sure that we practice what we preach inside. So I want Thunderbird alums around the world and our partners to be proud and confident, because we too are making sure that we do everything we can locally, nationally, and internationally. But as we move this forward, I want to go back to what is this multi-stakeholder pathway forward to achieving the SDGs and stakeholder capitalism. And what is you brought it up. We do need a better and enabling policy environment. And the role of governments, despite the withering of governmental authority and power influence in a globalized world, is still incredibly powerful. What are some of those policies or roles that government has to play, Halla, as we think about the decade of action and building back better?
Yeah, then there's lots to unpack there. Let me just first say thank you for doing what you're doing. I love the Jedis. What a great name. And because what we do need to do right now is we need to mobilize everyone. See, leadership no longer is only given to those in power. We just need to mobilize everywhere behind this agenda. But we cannot get there when we have governments that still incentivize industries that are basically ruining the future for us and our children and grandchildren. So I think we need to start with some policy changes. It's a very interesting story from Emmanuel Faber of Danone, who is one of the boldest and bravest business leaders out there, has a strong sense of justice and a strong sense that his business depends on nature. And we're not only facing COVID and the economic consequences, climate change and collapse in biodiversity is near us. The way we are living is going to leave us with that unless we act fast. So he's always been ahead of others, but during COVID, he decided to move his goal of becoming, by 2030, which is the global goals deadline, he decided to become a B Corp, basically holding himself fully accountable for the triple bottom line by 2025. And he did this with 99% support of his shareholders. And not only did he do that, he went and lobbied to his government to create a new type of corporation called Mission Company in French, but it's a similar legal entity as the benefit corporations or the B corporations that many of you may have heard of that are already one can found in 35 states and several countries around the world. But it basically incorporates a company with that accountability to all stakeholders. So I think there are legislative incentives that can be created that help people maybe even get better tax rates if they do this. Because at the end of the day, we're paying a lot of taxes. So I would name that as one sort of bold policy idea, that we actually make it easy for companies that want to be responsible to incorporate as responsible and take away any myth that you are there only for the shareholder, because that is a myth, but a lot of lawyers and general counsel still keep that alive. And so boardrooms are scared to think that they can count other stakeholders when they think about their future. Second, I think it's evident that we have to put a price on carbon. I don't see how we can avoid that. And that needs to be globally done. And then third, and this may feel like unrelated, but to me it's not, I think we need to figure out how we're going to manage social platforms and the spread of misinformation and how that impacts our democracies. Because at the end of the day, for whatever reason, it's impossible for me to understand, we have now political divisions around issues like climate, and yet every single one of us needs to breathe and can't breathe. And every single one of us that lives near a fire is equally exposed to that risk, and the weather events and the floods and the migrant and refugee crisis is only going to become bigger for all of us as South America and Africa get warmer and crops are no longer there to put food on the table, and we will have hundreds of millions of people on the run, and this is going to impact all of us. So all of these global challenges we're dealing with, they require, in my opinion, some bold ambition and action from our governments. And yet it's very difficult for us to get that in a world where we increasingly seem to have forgotten that we are first and foremost human beings who need to love where we live, who need to unleash our very leadership in a world that desperately needs a transformation.
That's phenomenal. I want to just, also add a couple of other partnerships we've evolved and created with Thunderbird and ASU. One is a task force to create a global carbon removal partnership. We've talked about this, Halla. Carbon removal is the missing third pillar of the climate transformation. And the exciting thing, as we showed in our market report that we had launched at Davos, is that there's $3 to $5 trillion a year in business opportunities, win-win solutions to remove carbon from the atmosphere and to save our planet in turn and transform the climate. So that's very exciting to us, working with companies, governments, civil society around the world. And you're absolutely right. We have to have a price on carbon, but we also have to have even bolder targets. We moved from 2 degrees to 1.5 degrees Celsius, as you were a leader of, as many has been, but we really need to get and focus on a target around carbon removal, probably 300, 350 parts per million, the levels at which humanity really flourish. Because as we head to 420 or 450, we really just can't get there. Amanda Ellis asked a question that's very much aligned with this discussion on climate, which is, it's so disappointing in a way, and you mentioned Europe and the lack of effort here, advancement really in the US, where we spend trillions of dollars, and rightfully so, in ensuring that human beings and families were taken care of during this horrible pandemic, and yet only 20% or 25% actually went to, or 20-25% went to, high carbon intensive industries and supporting them, in a sense, creating even more subsidies for unsustainable practices. How can we use this, and you talked about this at the beginning, this nexus of COVID and climate, to create this new world of opportunities, really the global Green New Deal that we need to have?
Yeah, I think that is the question. And just first on the environmental pillar, absolutely, we need to reduce our emissions. There's no doubt, and we need to align that with 1.5, and we need to do that faster, I think, than any one of us thought. We need to think about nature-based solutions, and we need to capture, and so we need something like 1 trillion trees. And all of us should really be thinking about how can we do that as one easy effort that any one of us can be involved in. And there's lots of things we can do on that. But I think what you're asking here, Sanjeev, is sort of how do we come together to understand that climate faces all of us, and how do we talk about that in a moment where do I have a job is at the top of mind for almost every individual. Because even before COVID, I think we did a bad job at that. I think the climate movement, and I include myself in that criticism, was talking to each other too much and talking in a way that felt very far away from people and didn't hit them in the heart. So net zero by 2050, what does that mean to a person that wants to know what can I do? And so I think we need to start talking about health and healthy jobs. I think we need to really think about the fact that we know this is an incredible economic opportunity, but it's also a real opportunity to create good jobs, quality jobs that will pay better. But then we need to invest in reskilling and there needs to be responsibility from business to work with their governments to create a just transition to this future. Because the reason so many people went out and voted for elected officials that are not proponents of addressing climate change, wording it very politely here, is because people thought that those who want to do something about climate don't care about jobs. And jobs is going to be number 1, 2, 3 issue for people all over the world. So let's get better at talking about how we turn this terrible moment and this challenge that is still unfolding. And I'm sorry to say, we're likely to lose more jobs. We're likely to have a fairly long economic difficult period, maybe more difficult than we've ever seen before, and that's hard. But if we decided to take all of this money that governments are printing and direct it very purposefully into creating these green, well-paid, exciting jobs, this could be the unifying force. This could be what lifts itself above the deep divisions in politics we're experiencing, not just in America, but actually the world over. And I think we need to get to that level. That's the only way, and we need to bring everybody along. And on that note, I'm excited to be one of the partners around TET countdown, a climate countdown that starts on 2020, where people all over the world are hosting events and conversations between multiple stakeholders and radically accelerating what all of us not only can but must do to get this decade of delivery right.
Thank you. So let's go to civil society. Again, in this contemporary moment, it seems that extremes and polarization have taken center stage. Yeah. And even between civil society and business, or civil society and government around the world, rather than the collaborative, win-win, positive partnerships that we believe are absolutely essential, SDGs 17++. So what is the role of civil society in this new age coronavirus? Of course, again, where we have to be virtual and we can't connect, and so much of the power of civil society is bringing people together, face to face, and really creating transformation that way. How can civil society contribute to this advancement of stakeholder capitalism and building back better and achieving the SDGs? Halla?
You are raising such an important question here, and I have to say, I consider myself today civil society, or I sit at this interesting intersection between business and governments and civil society. And that's been my favorite place to sit of all the places I've sat, because you realize what beautiful perspectives, talents, skills, mindsets you get from all of those actors when they come together. But it's so rare that we come together. We are, and I think the cancer in our society today is otherness. I think we're all so busy othering. Businesses, oh, those NGOs never get enough. And civil society says, those businesses never do anything right. And businesses, oh my God, government will never do anything worthwhile. And so there's all this otherness, and we just need to leave this otherness behind right now, because we're actually stuck in this moment, equally exposed to COVID, climate, social unrest and inequality, and a broken social contract, and nobody benefits in a world like that. Nobody. So it is all of our business to come together. So my advice to business, civil society, and government alike is, let's lay off the otherness and let's dial up the togetherness, and let's start co-creating. And one of the best examples I saw of that was one in the aftermath of Iceland's infamous financial meltdown. We, ordinary citizens of all walks of life, co-created a new vision and values for Iceland. It's one of the most beautiful efforts I've had the honor of being involved in. And now, more recently, on Imperative 21, just last week, on the 50th anniversary of Milton Friedman's shareholder primacy theory, artists, activists, business leaders, and public servants, hundreds of them from around the world, stood together, took over the NASDAQ and buildings in Sao Paulo and London and Africa, and said, we need a reset. And the art we projected was beautiful. You can see some of it on my social media and probably from lots of others. The mindset shifts that we highlighted were very important, like let's go away from minimum wage to a living wage. Let's go away from extractive to regenerative. Let's go away from male-dominated to gender balanced. Let's go away from exclusive to inclusive, sort of these mindset shifts that we need to make. Because at the end of the day, today's leadership is not as much about skills as it is about having the right mindset in meeting this moment. And so I think it's about togetherness. It's about we, not me. It's about stakeholders, not shareholders. It's about inclusion, not exclusion. And if we get that right in this moment, I have incredible hope that the solutions exist, and that with collaborative leadership, we can look back and say that in 2020, we finally saw our brokenness, we owned it, and we did something about it. And the decade of delivery was the era where we had the greatest progress for humanity everywhere. And it was inclusive, it was hard, but at the end of the day, we can look back and say, we did it. Not any one actor, we did it.
Wonderful. I have two questions from wonderful Thunderbird alums around the world. Ronald Okathis asks, as you're talking to leaders of businesses like our wonderful leader of Danone and many others, Halla, how are they thinking about spreading that leadership throughout their organization? So how is leadership training being evolved to embrace this distributed leadership, collaborative leadership within the company as well as beyond the company, so that these companies can really realize their full potential and contribute to this world of advancing the SDGs and stakeholder capitalism? The other question, which is very connected, is what can, from Mickey French, our wonderful alum, what can T-Birds do in their positions, whether they be in the private sector, the public sector? Many, again, are leaders of civil society as well. The wonderful thing about T-Birds, as you know, like yourself, we're across the world, we're across sectors. So what would you ask T-Birds to do in this pivotal moment in truly, global and planetary history?
Yeah, wow, good questions. First question, the quick answer is leaders in general are not doing enough to unleashing the leadership in everyone. But we see some great companies going ahead. Unilever has done a lot of sort of leadership transformation with its people to get to where it is, and it outperformed both financially and in terms of delivering sustainable living plan, and is most sought after by employees. And so we've really seen that this works for every stakeholder. And similarly, I'm seeing some of the boldest companies, they're actually putting ownership in the hands of their employees. And Danone has done this, and there's other companies that are doing it, and I think that's a very interesting way to go. And on a call with the B team leaders last week, I cannot tell you how much the CEOs of these big global companies talked about the power that employees and consumers hold. So even in companies where employees do not feel empowered, and this is the most common question I get when I speak to general populations of employees, they say, how do I get it? I want to do this, but my boss doesn't. What do I do? And I just want to point out that the largest company in the world, called Amazon, was not going to do anything on climate. And then thousands of their employees stood up, and they now have one of the boldest commitments of climate of any company in the world. We need to yet see them deliver it, and I would like to see them raise the bar on social issues as well, but we know employees have incredible power. Same message to T-Birds. I chose to go to Thunderbird, and this goes to an earlier point you made, Sanjeev, because Thunderbird was different. Because Thunderbird told me that 1/3 of what you will learn is business, 1/3 of what you will learn about the international political economy, and 1/3 you'll learn a new language. I knew a few when I came, but you will learn to speak a new language that you don't know, and you'll learn to do it quickly. And you will be equipped to lead on the global stage. I think T-Birds are uniquely equipped with the kind of multi-stakeholder, transformative mindset, being willing to challenge business as usual. And business schools are not. They're still teaching financial profit as the only measurable bottom line. Paul Pullman and I just wrote a chapter for a new business finance book we hope will be mainstreamed. But both how we teach leadership, how we teach finance, how we teach a lot of things needs to change, both for current students and old students, because we need to equip those who are older out there. And T-Birds can be the change. I honestly think we are large enough of a network, present in enough rooms, to say if we decide that it's time to reset the world, we can be, along with the B team leaders and many other courageous groups that are really trying to move this. It only takes about, my experience, between 10 and 20% of a population in an organization to reach a tipping point. Some people say it takes 30%. You're already moving at 10 to 20%. Be part of that group. Ignore all the energy that's now being put to the bottom feeders who are going to try to make a buck as long as they can in a world that doesn't care about anyone else. The me economy will be left behind. Be part of the we economy, where people are empowered, where we create a world that is shared prosperity and well-being on a healthy planet for both people and all of our citizens around the world. And so, yeah, that's my call to action. Be the change.
That's fantastic. And as you know, Halla, because we've talked so much, and it goes back to my first question and how much that wonderful compass diagram impacted me and our strategy as we were, reinventing Thunderbird, taking the very best of the past, that magical triangle: global leadership, management, business skills, international political economy, culture, language, cross-cultural communication, languages. To that, we've really added a mirror 3. One is, as you know, the fourth industrial revolution and the great opportunities of the new technologies that are before us. And of course, the pandemic has only accelerated that fourth industrial revolution. And I don't want to minimize, as you know, and we've talked about the challenges on privacy and many others that those technologies have for us. And yet we have to maximize the benefits of these new technologies, those 12 that are fundamentally changing who we are as human beings, our companies, our societies. A second is a major focus on sustainability and a global and a push for a global circular economy, all of our work on ESG. And the third is equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so when you think about Thunderbird 4.0 at ASU, we really do have the very best of the past, that magical triangle you invoked, and combined to that, this other triangle that mirrors it and really makes us 21st century. And so we're proud really to be, again, I believe, again, on the vanguards of leadership, management, and business in the world, and business schools in the world, because our goal is to be the most global and the most digital and the most transformative school that we can in every way that's possible. So as we wrap up, we have one question from a wonderful colleague at ASU about the social media business and what can we really do to try to create some sanity. In some sense, social media has empowered millions of people. So we have to accept that and support that, we do. And yet we know there has been a downside. It's very much part of this fourth industrial revolution. And then the complementary final question for you, Halla, as we wrap up is, if you had a magic wand today and you could do one or two things that you think would be truly game changers, that could really put us on the path to transformation, what would those be?
Oof, big questions here for the final minutes. First, let me express my gratitude for your leadership at Thunderbird and what you've done. You're spot on, and I love that new triangle. And I just have something to say about the fourth industrial revolution, because I actually think we learned overnight during COVID how fast we can transform ourselves when we have to. And so it was a lame excuse when we said we couldn't do finance from home, for example, which many financial companies said. I want to try to go directly. I may not get all of the answer in here, but the two wishes, I want to go there because that's so powerful. Everybody wishes to be in this position. I think I have two things that are very clear to me that are critical to making this vision we have for an inclusive, just green economy work. Number one, I would like to mandate the transparent disclosures of ESG or /SDG performance, that we very clearly mandate these disclosures as the new norm. I've tried to ask the Big Four to lead this voluntarily, but I think we need to mandate it and get behind policy if that doesn't happen fast. Two, we have to change the face of leadership. We have to change who is around the table to change how we actually do this.
This is the face.
Well taken care of, I can see. Yes. I wish you could bring me one. Thank you. So I actually think that that's very important. And so with, I will repeat it not to be mean, but male, pale, and stale isn't going to cut it. It isn't going to drive the innovation we need. It isn't going to understand the challenges and hardships that many populations in our society have experienced. So, and I think that may mean what we've done in the Nordic area. We've had gender quotas for the boardroom, and you know what? It changes what's on the agenda. It even brings ESG on the agenda. It changes how we talk about things. It expands our definition of success, and it will accelerate the transition to stakeholder capitalism. So, one, mandate transparent ESG disclosures. Two, change who is around the table with strong targets, if not quotas. And three, we live in a world that may actually serve humanity again and make a whole lot more sense than this one. And it is all of our benefit to get to that world. This is not for women or Black people or for those of us who work on ESGs. This is for humanity. Shared prosperity and well-being on a healthy planet is what we have to shoot for.
Well, thank you so much, Halla. We're so grateful for taking time out of your busy schedule, joining us at Thunderbird and our broader Thunderbird global family and all of our partners around the world as we continue to try to play a shared leadership role for shared prosperity for all. I want you to come and join us at Thunderbird and ASU. We have events throughout the day for the next 3 days and into the evenings 24/7 as we have digital global mindsets. I want to also mention that Sylvia Barros spoke about the role of government, and one thing that we have is a partnership with the Global Initiative on Fiscal Transparency and International Business Partnership, because as Halla saying, we need this kind of reporting, mandated reporting around ESG, SDGs with companies. We have to have the same kind of thing with government budgets. We have to remember that trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars go through those massive corporations, which are our governments around the world. And still, that is far too opaque, non-participatory, and unaccountable. So thank you again, Halla dear. Please stay safe and healthy. To all of our T-birds around the world, stay safe and healthy and continue to join hands, because there's nothing we can't achieve, as Halla said, when we work together.
Thank
all the
you,
very
Sandeep,
best.
and all of
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Thank you.